There's no UFC this weekend, so today we're going to be looking at the most annoying things about the UFC/UFC fans. Number one is Joe Rogan hate. I mean, you've been seeing in all the comments, everyone's saying Joe's a casual or Joe's not in touch with the sport anymore, or they say Joe's a bad commentator, but I think Joe's probably one of the best possible commentators you could have. One, he brings many eyes to the sport. Obviously, his podcast, number one in the world, millions of views a month. In the world of talking, Joe Rogan's the king. And that's exactly what he does for the UFC as a broadcaster. And just through his podcast alone, talking about MMA, so many people have checked it out and become big fans. The more eyes, the better, how I see it. The more eyes, the more money, the bigger the fights, the more hype. Two, Joe has a very colorful personality, and he's extremely knowledgeable in martial arts. He's been training martial arts for years now. I think he started with Taekwondo. He's now a black belt in Jiu-Jitsu, I believe. Like I said, he has all the charisma in the world that you could possibly want for a colored commentator. His reactions are insane. You've seen memes made just out of his reactions in the booth. Anytime there's a knockout or knockdown, he adds to the moment. He makes it way more entertaining, and he really helps build the hype. And number three, he's truly passionate about MMA. Like I said, he's trained martial arts. He's been there since the beginning. He didn't get paid at first, and he's stuck around. He talks about it all the time on his podcast. He even has his own MMA segment on his podcast where he just does fighters. I think he's more passionate than like 99% of fans about MMA, and probably more passionate about MMA than some of the fighters. He truly is a perfect commentator, I believe. And I don't think any of the hate is warranted. And the day he goes is going to be a sad day. Number two is the pay-per-view and ticket prices. Number one, the pay-per-view prices promote piracy, and they make less money in the long run, I believe, than if they were to just price it at like $10, for example, or $20, for example, or just have like a yearly pass you could buy. But no, they make them $80 a pop. At least that's what it is for us here in the US. We can't afford that. Not everyone's like Elon Musk and has money out the wazoo. We actually have like, I'm not saying I'm broke. I got hella money, but at least for everyone else, I don't think it's fair. You're like pricing fans out of the sport when you make it so expensive. So number two, like I just said, it's not accessible to many fans slash out of pay range for many. I just went to a UFC not too long ago, the John Jones card 309. I was at the absolute nosebleeds. Like there was no seat behind me. Just for those seats alone, pre-sale, $399. After the fees, it's like 400 something per ticket, even for me. And like I said, I have hell money. That was expensive. And then something I also noticed when I was sitting there is the card went on, the seats towards the bottom slowly started to fill up. But it literally went from top to bottom of people who were there from first. The closer you got towards the bottom is the later they got to the fights. So the real hardcores are the ones sitting in the nosebleeds, not the celebrities sitting front row. Number three, not trying to pay all that money. Like I said, I got hella money, but that don't mean I want to spend it all. So next, out of UFC is out of touch with fans, I believe. How? Well, number one, bad matchmaking. Look at Cruz versus Font coming up on UFC Seattle. Why is it not Cruz versus Cejudo? Or why is it not Cruz versus Garbrandt? All three of those guys need a win. And that would be one of the most hyped up, entertaining fights you could possibly do without title implications. Cruz had an early stoppage against Cejudo, and Garbrandt had the craziest performance against Cruz, which some think was like kind of a fluke, right? So I'm sure Dom would love to get his Garbrandt loss back and his Cejudo loss. So why are they doing Cruz versus Font and Cejudo versus Yadong? I don't mind the Cejudo Yadong fight, but when Cruz is on the card, why don't you put them two together? They both need a win. I just don't get it. That would be perfect. Or look at when they did Diaz versus Luque, and then they had Tony Ferguson fighting Chiesa originally. Tony versus Nick Diaz would be the best fight they could have made. Both those guys are washed beyond belief, and I would say they need a win, but they really don't. They're not going to be climbing the ladder anytime soon. But still, at least we would have got to see one of those guys win. But instead, we got to see Tony lose again, and Nick just never fought. Number two, nonsense card order. For example, look at Bo Nickel on the UFC 300 card above former champions like Davison Figueiredo, Cody Garbrandt, Aljamain Sterling, Holly Holm. She can stay on the prelims, but still, Bo Nickel above all of them. I love Bo Nickel, but that was a little disrespectful to the champions, and I don't think that was a fair card placement. And then look at Thompson versus Buckley on the prelims, and you want to know who was above him? Kayla Harrison versus Ketlin Vieira was on the main card over those two. as well as Roman Dolidze versus Kevin Holland and Jose Aldo versus Mario Batista. How are you going to put those fights over Thompson versus Buckley? Like, it was an amazing fight stylistically. That was absolutely ridiculous. They need to put some respect on Wonder Boy's name. Number three, they think we like the Nina drama collabs. We don't want to see these. We don't care about her eating a cheeseburger and plugging some random spot. Or we don't care about her training with the fighters. The real fans don't want to see that stuff. I'm sure there's some cucks that love to see it, but come on. And the thing he did with like that jelly bean girl, like when he was carrying her around in a suitcase, like what is he doing, bro? He'll do anything to promote like power slap. I don't know, bro. He's tripping. This one needs no explanation. No one likes when they push power slap, which I haven't seen as much, luckily. But like, dude, just get this out of our face. It's not like the UFC. It's not going to be as big as the UFC. It's not going to be as big as any other sport that's mainstream. Just get this out of our face. We don't want to see it. Next, there's no love for the heels in this sport. The UFC wouldn't be as entertaining if everyone acted like a GSP and a Wonder Boy. If everyone was just all respectful and there's never any build up, the UFC would be so boring. There'd be no emotional connections in any fights. And it'd be so vanilla and so plain without heels like Kobe Covington and Jamal Hill. Number two, community as a whole preys on their downfall and no one dares to go against the grain. When I made posts saying I like Kobe Covington or Jamal Hill, there's not a single person in the comments that liked them. The only times people showed support for Jamal Hill that I've seen is after a video of him losing to Yuri, getting brutally knocked out. Then people started to respect him. And then the people started coming out of the weeds saying, oh, he was never that bad. Where were they when he was the heel? And everyone hated him when he went up to spar Alex. Nowhere to be seen. But, I mean, these guys are what make the sport interesting. And number three, they create the storylines. Like I said, build-ups are so much better when there's heels, when there's a villain versus a hero, and when there's good versus bad. We like to see these storylines, so that's why we need heels. They help draw in pay-per-views and attention to the card. Without them, like I said, it'd be extremely vanilla and plain. You would not get as emotionally connected to the fights as you do. Next, we got weak pay-per-view cards. Number one, fans pay equal amount for a worse product. How are you going to pay the same amount for this card as you did for UFC 300 or as you did for UFC 311? In what world are those two the equivalent in price? Not this world. This would be worth like $10, I'd say, if I'm being generous. When you have a pay-per-view this bad, you cannot price it the same as all the other ones. Number two, they only happen 12 to 14 times a year. We can't afford to waste them on cards like this. If we're going to have stacked pay-per-view cards that everyone looks forward to only so many times a year, 12 to 14 times, we cannot understack them and do this. Let's call it what it is. There's one actual good fight that will get you like looking forward to it. And then there's just some filler fights that will be entertaining, but you're not really looking forward to them like you are Gaethje versus Hooker or Alex versus like Live. Like the only fight that's gonna get you like excited is gonna be Duplessis versus Strickland. If you say any other fight is gonna get you excited, you're just lying. You're trying to be a hardcore. Yes, they're gonna be entertaining, I'm sure, but they're not gonna get you that excitement you feel when there's a big fight, a good fight with two stars. Number three, they don't generate any hyper buzz. I guarantee you, UFC 312 will be swept under the rug. No one's gonna remember this. No one's gonna be hyped up for this. You're not gonna see ESPN ads about this, and if you do, you're just gonna skip the channel. This will be the least hyped card of the year. I guarantee it. And when cards aren't hyped, they're not as fun to watch. The environment's not as fun. Simply, weak pay-per-view cards suck, and UFC needs to stop making them. Next, we got fighter inactivity. Number one, it's hard to build fighters when they aren't fighting. How are you supposed to get people on someone's bandwagon if they're only fighting once a year? You need to fight to build hype. And if you lose like Peyton Talbot did, you can't sit out for another like 6 months. He got a knockout in 10 seconds and he sits out for like 6 months. And he loses. If he sits out for 6 months again, his hype's going to be gone. He needs to come back in like 3 months to preserve any amount of hype he has left and get a good finish, or else all his hype's going to be gone. Number two, we do not get to see our favorite fighters. If your favorite fighter is someone like JDM, Shavkat, Colby Covington, we don't get to see these guys. We get to see them once a year if we're lucky. Leon Edwards. I just named like a whole ton of welterweight. These are people's favorite fighters, and they're only getting to see them once every 1 or 2 years. How crappy is that as a fan that you barely get to see your favorite fighter in the sport? I don't know about you guys. I'm not going to say who my favorite fighter is, but when he's fighting, I get more hyped for that than any other fight that the UFC could possibly make. Even if it's a fight night, I get extremely hyped. I get the most hyped out of any fight when my favorite fighter is fighting. I even get the butterflies myself, and I'm not even fighting. So, number three, they hold up the division. Look at Usman. He's holding like a number one or number two spot in the rankings. He hasn't fought since October 2024. No, he hasn't fought since October 2023. He's just sitting on his ranking. Look at John and Aspinall. John's inactive and doesn't want to fight Aspinall. He's just stalling up the division so Tom can't get his defenses. I mean, when you do this, it's hard for fighters to come up the ranking and things to move if there's just a standstill at the top. Like, it just sucks. That's all I had for the video today. If you liked it, please like and subscribe. If you didn't like it, that's too bad. And I'll see you soon.